Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Objekt, Cocoon Crush. Yeah, I'm aware Mark from Spectrum Pulse already beat me to this one, but actually that's why I'm covering it. He told me on Twitter it'd probably be something up my alley and I ought to give it a shot, so I obliged. I'd never actually previously heard of Objekt, aka TJ Hertz. He's not been around that long. Seems he got a bit of attention with his debut album Flatland in 2014. I listened to it, thought it was pretty good. Pretty top-notch sound design and production that hit hard without much of anything in the way of melody, and had a pretty unique, almost organic but not quite sound that I found to be pretty enjoyable. That said, I was not blown away by it. While I had a lot of respect for its well-done execution, it wasn't one that I felt all that compelled to come back to or that I had much of any emotional resonance with. It basically went in one ear and out the other. A good album, but not one that I ever see myself returning to. Now, I haven't yet seen Mark's review of this latest album, but I did see his score. He gave it an 8. I'll admit this isn't the type of album I typically expect him to give out that kind of score, so I had high hopes going into this follow-up. So what did we get with Cocoon Crush? Well, right from the get-go, I enjoyed this a fair bit more than his debut. That said, I also get the feeling that Objekt was wearing his influences on his sleeve a lot more this time around. Or at the very least, the whole thing reminded me of one specific outfit. This album sounds a lot like the future sound of London. Not to the point of feeling like a rip-off, mind you. He definitely has a more modernized take on their sound that also has a lot of dark edginess to it that FSOL themselves don't typically utilize. Not to mention the running time's a lot shorter than most FSOL projects, at least it has fewer tracks. But the resemblance is undoubtedly there. I can totally see this coming from Gaz Cobain and Brian Dugans. Now, I'm not typically one to praise artists for having styles so clearly derivative of other ones. For instance, if I hear obscure Bandcamp artist number 306 that's just trying to sound like Aphex Twin again, I'm not interested in that. I'll say, okay dude, you're not special, and move on. But the future sound of London is not an act I typically see as a role model for newer artists like this. I mean, nobody out there to this day sounds like FSOL do. To pull off their particular sound and style, you need a pretty high baseline level of sound design talent and attention to detail. So yes, while Objekt is, again, not so similar to the point of being a ripoff, I consider the fact that he is able to easily remind me of those guys actually a fairly big mark in his favor. Well, to a certain extent. It would be nice if I could just sit here and say, whoa, this guy sounds like nothing else out there. But, you know, enough about that. So yes, Cocoon Crush is a very enjoyable album, and one I had a much easier time coming back to for repeat visits. I think it has a greater focus on melody and atmosphere than his last album did, which only makes for a more fun and attention-grabbing listen. There are tracks here that just kind of meander around and let the sound design do the work. The opener, Lost and Found Lost Mix, and second track, Dazzle Anew, do this pretty well. The former focusing on a 3-chord progression of almost bell-like synths, do. Layers upon layers of watery textures, some pizzicato strings as accompaniment as well, though it doesn't really start to showcase how strange and creepy the album can get later down the line. It's pretty light and fresh sounding for most of it. Dazzle Anew, with its giant bassy percussion, seems to lumber forwards at an uneven pace, with little Asian-sounding textures on top later on. That one showcases the tone of the album even better. There's also the astoundingly creepy Nervous Silk with all its various organic elements that seem to run out of sync with each other, and off-key music box melodies that are reprised in the interlude and other not. Rest Your Troubles Over Me, despite the possible LCD sound system nod with the spelling of "your" in the title, seems mostly concerned with a static set of horror movie textures, light tinnitus ringing in some parts, and a bell synth that sounds like a clock chiming with a totally incomprehensible processed voice on top. This didn't stick out as a standout much the first couple of listens, but it was a lot better once I really sat down and soaked up all the weird details. Though you also got the random acid synth textures of Silica, which switch off for moving super fast and not much at all. This particular track admittedly never stuck out to me much as a highlight. It's pretty forgettable compared to other tracks and doesn't have much else to set itself apart from what I already said. But there are also tracks here that focus on the more rhythmic and beat-heavy side. These tended to be more of highlights to me, like the sparkly but hard-hitting 35 with all its layers of strange bell textures over the steady Monolake-esque beat. And Deadlock has a more psychedelic-sounding beat with more acoustic cymbal textures going up against some of the more 808-ish drum machine sounds, with lots of half-atonal synth patterns that rise above the mix. Runaway doesn't start out all that interesting, with its beat-focused sections that just kind of blend in with everything, but there's a sudden sidetrack into some really low-key pianos and some what sounds like kids in the playground. Then it goes right back into the beat-heavy parts, which are even more compelling at this point thanks to all these off-key bells and soundtracky synth pads in the background. And it finally just ends in a ball of rough static noises, like which is admittedly not a move that FSOLR is likely to do, so that's cool. And Secret Snake is even better. Maybe my favorite track on the album. While as typically unsettling and alien as the rest of the album is, a lot more of the tones seem to harmonize with each other more and form more solid grooves. Real melodies rise out of the atmosphere and slowly start to take form as they go on. Halfway in, the rigid bass synths start to form a really fun bass line, and big One-O-Tricks-ish synths come in to accompany the odd mix later. It just keeps getting more and more engaging as it goes on. Excellent track. And then, of course, we end with an alternate mix of the opener, Lost and Found, Found Mix, which takes on those exact same themes and melodies from that first version, and includes a lot more interesting spins on it. Not in such a way it makes that opener feel superfluous or pointless, though. Right off the bat, there's a stronger Tangerine Dream-ish bass line going underneath the mix, and more 808 percussion. But once we've hit the point where the first version ended, we're interrupted with all these abrasive static noises, and transition into a section that seems to have some very light trumpets way in the background, and from then into a part that's atmospherically similar to where we started, with all its strange organic textures, yet a lot lighter and less foreboding than the bulk of this project, forming more conventional harmonies and chords and that kind of stuff. Pretty beautiful and climactic finish to this project. So yeah, that's Cocoon Crush. Now I will say this is definitely an album that absolutely demands you sit up and listen to all it has to offer. And if you don't do that, it can get stale with enough repeat listens and just end up like Flatland, going in one ear and out the other, and I lose some of the urge to come back to it as much. And even in most of my listens of this thing, not much of it sticks with me once it's finished. But I still think this is a far better album than that was. I found the more organic textures a lot more fulfilling than the synthetic touches of the debut. The stronger presence of melodies and harmonies helped really keep me invested. While the parallels to something like FSOL's Lifeforms or Environment 6 are pretty strong, and this album has a pretty similar purpose and execution, its particular set of textures and generally darker approach to its atmosphere help set it apart from what those guys have already done. So yes, I'm definitely glad I sat down with this thing. It's gonna be a year-end list contender for sure, and it's definitely worth checking out. This is a very impressive album, and I'm looking forward to seeing whatever Objekt plans on doing next. I'm overall feeling a solid 8 out of 10. But of course, it's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me a review, something linked to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.